Harwich Affordable House Trust Committee meeting for July 10. Unbelievable, summer's half over. I think it started yet. And with that call to order, public comment. I think we're, Elaine, you have anything to say?
There's your big chance, Elaine.
That's quite unusual, by the way.
Yeah.
I know, I'll pay for that comment.
I should hope so.
Hey, you never miss an opportunity. Let me then, while we have a few minutes to start, let me just, we're a new committee. We've, new members, and I'm excited. We have I can't imagine a better and well-informed committee. And obviously, I've missed the last 2 weeks of it. But I do want to take this time to discuss that my feeling is we need to bring some more structure to the committee right now. And what I'd like to suggest is in order to do that, I'd like to organize it so comments you have coming to Brianna, I'll go through me as chair, because otherwise if he gets comments from all of us, then we lose control. And I promise I'll react right away to it. And the same way with, most of our stuff we work with Brianna, but when it goes to Joe too, let's centralize that and have that come through me. And then I'll certainly react to that right away. I'm not going anywhere anymore for hopefully forever after this. But so that will bring out, again, comments are certainly welcome. I just feel the need to bring some structure to it. So when we move forward.
Great.
Did you say Joe too, or just you and Brianna?
Well, my intent is to bring Brianna into it, and then we'll move it on to Joe.
Okay, as needed.
Right. And Joe and I actually have a meeting at 3 o'clock, and that'll be part of our discussion will be on how we relate between us and Joe and Brianna. So I want to bring it all together, that we function as an organization. We need as many voices, but still, in my mind, we still need. I want to be sure we have structure, and then I'll feed back on that. But I'm certainly and welcome all your comments. I'm not going to stop any of that. I'm just trying to bring the structure to it. Let's move on then to Jen. Let's start the discussion that we had. Hi, Jen.
Hi, everyone.
Hi there.
Jen.
Cindy Williams couldn't make it, so we're moving up a bit on the agenda.
Larry.
We can vote on the minutes.
There you go. Yep.
And I did read again the agenda, the minutes. I'll point out we really made some good decisions last meeting in terms of moving ahead on the RFP and getting that to go. And I think that'll be part of our discussion I want to get to today, is be sure that's in fact moving ahead. Mary?
I'd just like to propose one change to the minutes.
Sure.
It's the first sentence on the second page, and I just think it was worded kind of odd. Mr. Lowney, I'm going to read you what I'm putting instead. Mr. Lowney moved to approve expanding J.M. Goldson's contract to include help with developing a process and a form for evaluating developers' proposals for funding.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. I'm not sure where you're.
I think that's
where
what
you're at
we
now,
agreed
Mike.
to, but the way it's worded just didn't make sense to me.
Okay. I'll accept that because Brianna's going to report on some activity that basically just addresses that.
Okay.
Almost in the same verbiage, I believe. Is that right, Brianna? So.
Yeah, sorry, I was looking for something, so I didn't hear what you said. Can you repeat it?
Yeah.
So I'm fine with that. Is everyone
Mr.
else?
Lowney moved to,
Bob?
move to approve expanding J.M. Goldson's contract to include help with developing a process and a form for evaluating developers' proposals for funding.
Yep.
For housing funding.
Yep.
And
I
you
have
can
an
have
update
that
on
if you
that
want.
later. Yep.
Okay. We have a motion. Bob? Please.
Before we get to a motion, I've got a couple of nitpicky things, but I think that they add clarity for anybody that's reading the minutes. On the first page, the third paragraph from the bottom, speaking about Mr. Locke, Executive Director.
Right.
I think it should say clearly Harwich Conservation Trust, not Nonprofit Land Trust.
Yeah.
The next paragraph below, Mr. Spencer noted for the record, he's also a member of the Harwich Conservation Trust. It should say Harwich Conservation Trust. And somebody needs to tell me if I'm being too picky, but these things matter to me from a clarity point of view. On the second page, members of the trust, it says members of the trust. We've been talking about two different trusts, and I think that we should articulate that it's the HAHT, Harwich Affordable Housing Trust, asked questions of Mr. Locke. In the next paragraph down, speaking about Ms. Goldson, I think it's the third sentence, fourth sentence. The sentence reads, Ms. Goldson gather enough information to create a mission statement. I think that means Ms. Goldson will be gathering enough information to create a mission statement. Mr. Ballantyne asked Ms. Goldson to review the mission of the Housing Committee.
Housing Trust, yeah.
Let's get away from the Affordable Housing Committee. It's the Housing Committee. To be sure that the missions is what we're trying to make sure are cooperative and not competitive. Not the committees, not the committee and the trust, but it's the missions. Chairman Ballantyne will arrange a joint meeting with the Housing Committee and the Affordable Housing Trust. Paul Halkiotis noted that they will be talking about the Comprehensive Plan Committee, noted that they will be creating a local production plan. Is that true?
It is true. It's part of their overall mission to do that.
Okay.
They're going to, Mary, help me out, but I think in at least my previous discussions, they're basically going to treat that as loosely defined as almost a separate subcontract to have them help with the local comprehensive plan, because, or the, excuse me, housing production plan, because that feeds into the local comprehensive plan.
Okay, because I was reading someplace else that didn't fit with, so that's fine.
And I believe that's already underway.
I think it is, yeah.
Good. Just a couple of more. On the third page, thank you, Mary, for your edits. Down below on that third page, it said, Mr. Powers thanked members for their participation. Was that Mr. Powers or was that our chair?
I don't recall.
I don't remember.
I don't remember.
No idea.
And then,
I'd be comfortable just striking that, quite frankly.
Yeah.
okay. And then the meeting adjourned.
That was Joe.
I was just reading the committee handbook.
I mean,
and
we thank you all the time, but, you know.
the meeting adjourned at what time? There needs, and I think that it was about 3:10.
Yeah,
I recall about 2 hours, yeah.
Okay. So tell me,
But-
am I being too picky?
no, it's perfect.
Absolutely
Those are
not.
good changes.
Good, yeah.
Okay.
I think we could just refer to us as the trust. I think that
The
is,
trust?
yeah, I think that's clear, but everything else seemed fine to me.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm thinking with that many changes, we should maybe hold on approving these
We can-
minutes,
we
get
can
all
do that.
those
Absolutely.
done.
And we come back,
Oh, good
because
job.
there's
Come
no
Very
hurry
good.
on
Thank
that.
you.
Okay, we'll do that. And now remind us to note when we quit today. The time.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Mary. So now we can move on to the Jen Golson. You wish to give us a rundown of the meeting. I missed that, but I will say the write-up in the Chronicle gave it all A+ as far as I could tell in terms of good discussion. So,
Oh, good. That's wonderful. Well, yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear your thoughts I think everyone was there other than Larry, and it was a great turnout. Alana, who is on with us, my colleague, is going to go through the summary that we gave you last Friday and just review the highlights of that. But I'd love to just know from from each of you, what your impressions were, if there was one main takeaway, anything that surprised you, or you felt like, yeah, I was kind of expecting that and I'm glad it came out that way.
This is Claudia. I wanted to say that I thought the way that you handled the questions, especially the level of, how far in depth you went or not, but allowing for more, I just thought the way that you facilitated was really, really well done. And you kept a very calm, level, very professional way about you in presenting the material, but again, just a very welcoming space for people to have questions. And again, if they wanted to deep dive, you were available, but also, kind of maintaining the time frame. So I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you. That's really nice. Thank you for saying that. It was fun. They actually had really great questions. It was a very thoughtful group.
Mary?
I certainly agree with Claudia. It was very well done, and I guess what I felt good about is both the mission and the goals, all we got were some minor tweaks. So we really had it, and we got minor tweaks. So that was of great comfort. The part that was disappointing to me was the turnout. Not just that it was so few people, but I think 85% of us were homeowners, and 70% of us were over 65. We are clearly not the people that need houses, so that was kind of a bummer. I would have liked some younger people that didn't own houses and were trying to get there. But I don't know how you control that.
Well, thank you for mentioning that, Mary. And, it's all relative, right? So we had just gone to another a forum similar in another community, and there were much fewer people. So we were impressed with the level of turnout that you were able to get. But I know it's, these public forums are often skew older and skew toward ownership. It's tough to get people out, especially on I think it was a beautiful day, if I'm remembering right. It's tough to get people to come out to things like this, especially things that are so specialized. Sometimes you can get people out when it's a little more general about affordable housing needs in general, but when you throw in it's about the Affordable Housing Trust, it can be a little intimidating. And I wonder if, I know that we'll talk about this in a little bit, but part of your goals is to work with the Housing Committee to work on a housing production plan update. That may be a good chance to really engage more broadly, particularly if you have things that are not just about the forums, but if you have public survey, community surveys, that can often get a broader representation, especially if the outreach is very strong. And, we'd be happy to talk more about that if that's what you're thinking as well. But I just wanted to offer that.
Thanks.
Yeah, Jen, I thought you did a great job. It was very well done. For me, I knew a lot of the material, but you always learn something. And sometimes you get into this tunnel vision of just one thing you're focused on. So for example, I always think just 80% AMI helping one person that makes 450. And what I got out of it, especially at the deep dive roundtable, is don't forget about the 3-bedroom units. So when we draft an RFP, I might have not overlooked it, but it may not have been a priority, but after that meeting it was. So it was fantastic just for that one thing I learned, which was great.
Yeah, that's great.
The readouts from the committees, or the tables, I thought was wonderful. It was really inspiring. There was so much information that was given and so much participation in that particular piece. I was very pleased about that.
Great.
Elaine?
Oh.
Please. Jen, we have one of our public comments.
Oh, wonderful.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Elaine Shovlin. Just as a town resident that wasn't able to be there that night, I was very disappointed that it wasn't recorded so I could watch it later and see what happened. So maybe next time?
Yeah.
Yep. I agree, that's a good comment, Elaine. Part of that is where we held it. We probably need to hold it more in a community center where we can have those facilities. because that would be our normal practice. You know, I obviously wasn't there, but reading I'll call them the Cliff Notes that was in Bill Galvin put together in the Chronicle, I found it interesting that there was some comment. I agree with Brendan. He did a great job of summarizing some of the information we know was involved with the Marceline property, the acreage. But I thought the comments of the Community Development Partnership, which actually gave specific ideas on 3-bedroom units and stuff, is a worthwhile discussion as we move into our, hopefully very quickly, into our RFP, at least in a general way, that they list the specifics. I'm not sure we need that, but it did open up, I think, avenues that we need to talk about and put forward in an RFP. I also was a little surprised, and I read from this, if this is correct, a follow-up action, there's still some discussion on the AMI as it crosses CPC and as it crosses what may be possible. And so that's another area we keep thinking that's kind of a done deal, but we still have some avenues to look forward to. As we address this, and I know, you know, that's our main focus, the 80% figure that, Brandon, you've been talking about. But in our larger needs of, Joe's going to kill me, but I'm going to use it anyway, affordable housing. And by that I mean 100% or somewhat higher than that we get our work. So that's discussion we need. And if I'm reading this right, that was left as an open question to come back and gather more information on. So I look forward to that information coming back.
All right, good. Well, if it's okay with everyone, what I'd like to do is go through just a high level of the summary that Elena sent you all on Friday, and then we can go into an activity to start to think of some actions that can help address the goals that we're working with at this point. Elena, why don't you go ahead with the summary? Now, can you share your screen?
I believe I can. Let me give it a try. Only thing about this, it will be text heavy. Is that visible? I have a loading icon. I am getting an error message. We're experiencing difficulties with the video conference. But I do.
Well, I think you could probably talk to it without the visual then, yeah.
Yeah,
we have it, I
so that's
think,
what we'll do.
either by computer or some of us by hard copy, have the text message. And I would suggest that we'll attach the hard copy to the agenda minutes, so it's available when that becomes available. So proceed, please.
I think that's marvelous. And Brianna has the full set with the appendices attached, which also have some photos of the event. So just at a high level, this was a public forum that was held on June 27th. Many of you were present with us. As was remarked upon, we had a turnout of 27 people. Of that number, this is acknowledging that not everyone chose to participate in the demographic activity, which let us glean some of this information. But generally, in the room, about 74% of attendees were year-round residents. 67 reported being age 65 or older. 86% identified as homeowners, and 73% reported being connected to Harwich for more than 10 years. Another interesting statistic, even if the turnout, may have been smaller than was desired, there was a pretty good range in terms of how familiar attendees were with the housing trust. So you had 43% of people who said they were not very familiar with the Harwich Affordable Housing Trust. So in that sense, you did get people in the room who learned a lot and now are more connected to you, which I think is an important thing. I think it was Claudia who noted this earlier, but as part of this presentation, attendees were invited to give commentary on the draft mission, draft goals, and also share their vision for housing development at the Marceline site. As was remarked on the mission and goals, the feedback we got there, a lot of it was, yes, we like these, and here's where we would see additions. So when looking at the mission, There was a lot of interest in supporting up to that 80% AMI. There was significant interest in making sure that any deed restriction that was supported by trust funding was in perpetuity, so making sure you're not losing affordable units. And there was also interest in the trust serving as an advocacy organization and really supporting potentially zoning changes that would be needed to support housing development and particularly affordable housing development. And when looking at the goals, there definitely was interest in working towards your 10% SHI goal. There was a lot of interest in the trust acting as a land steward. And so that's relevant to the Marceline site, but also there was interest in how might the trust acquire new land and how should the trust, get the greatest value out of land that they come into ownership of, which is not developable for their purposes. So a lot of conversation around land ownership and strategy for the trust. Again, definitely interest in making sure that Harwich doesn't lose any affordable units. And then when talking about the Marceline site specifically, which many groups were very eager to do, there was conversation about that site being used for dense housing development. I think there was a lot of interest still in that conversation about even if with it being dense that we need to be considerate of and having a mind towards conservation of green space on that site. So some thoughtful design, some interest in sustainable design, strong interest in seeing rental developments there, even though homeownership was a conversation, more broadly in terms of housing in Harwich. And then again, that conversation about 3-bedroom units. Several groups remarked on a real need to see what they called family units in describing those 3-bedroom units be included at the Marceline site. And then I think just some conversation threads that came up across the various topics. There was interest in having that deeper community involvement, making sure that more voices were in the room and part of these conversations. We talk about what the goals were, underscoring something already shared in this meeting, making sure that there's strong collaboration with the housing committee, and also making sure that there is thought given to how future housing development will tie into public services in town, including transportation. And again, the summary will be, it sounds like, available to members of the public. That has all the information shared here today, as well as more in-depth information on the form of the meeting. So maybe folks who weren't able to attend and we don't have that recording can read through the process in a little greater detail. And then what we did as a result of getting all this feedback from you all and the attendees was we went back to the draft mission and goals and tweaked them and included the new information that was shared with us. Jen, would you like to go through that now, or do you want to take pause? Have any questions?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'd say you all have the document in front of you. If you have any thoughts about either the summary or the proposed red lines, we're happy to talk about those before we go into this activity, which I have on my screen here that I'll share when we're ready, but it's basically a Post-it note activity that's virtual Post-it notes, where we're going to think about what actions you want to do to implement those goals, to help achieve those goals. And I have some of it populated already, but I think first it'll be appropriate to pause and just hear if you had any other thought on the summary or on the red line changes, if you wanted to have any other changes or make any other revisions to those.
Jen, I just wanted to touch on a couple of things. So I was going with your key findings and then kind of cross-referencing them. So a couple of things. One, I wasn't seeing the comment around the dispensation of parcels that are not buildable in the draft mission or goals. So I wasn't sure if that was left out, based on some of the feedback, or if we can add that in there somewhere. It looks like we have something on the properties, including overseeing development of trust-owned properties, so I don't know where it's best to go. The other piece I also noted was the promoting, under the mission, the third bullet, promoting community understanding about needed zoning changes to support affordable housing and housing needs of Harwich. I wasn't sure, again, based on the feedback, if that was a promoting community understanding or advocating or actually, promoting or being a participant in the zoning changes. I wasn't sure, again, how we felt, but it didn't seem to mirror necessarily, it seemed a little bit more than just getting, community understanding. Whether or not we decide to do that is another thing, but just wanted to make sure it was there for discussion.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a good point. Alana, could you just speak to those 2 points? I think that we probably could integrate those.
Sure. On the first point, I think we were thinking about dispensation of that land sort of falling under Goal 5. And Goal 5, which is a new goal in the red line, is create criteria for the trust acquisition and development of property. So under that sort of broader heading was the conversation of if property owned by the trust does not meet, certain criteria, that there would be a process for dispensation, but we can more specifically augment that language to call that out. And then when thinking about how the trust in the mission will either be an advocate or be a community conduit for identifying and advancing zoning changes, I do see how there's two themes there, and perhaps we can pull that apart.
Okay, great. One final thing was, I noticed at our table, and I know I didn't go through in great detail how each table came out, but ours was pretty adamant about not having the trust be a land steward or be involved in that, to get the RFP and then hand it off, as well as they wanted to exceed the 10%. So that was, I don't know, Brianna, if you remember that. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there just so it was, I'm not sure if it didn't make our notes or whatever, but just thought I'd put it out there. Thanks.
Thank you, Claudia. Yeah, I think the 2 points you made initially, I think that we need some further discussion on that as agenda items going forward. For instance, I read the dispensation of particles not buildable as a discussion we need to better define, because there are some folks that think land property is not buildable if there's a vernal pool on it, for instance. Well, that's already protected by conservation to within, I think, 200 feet. They can't build on that. But sometimes that's still dispensable for us because it adds into the total property area that we can use as a building site off of that vernal pool. And that sometimes I think is confused by some people on that area. So I'd like to bring that back as an agenda item to better understand that. And what was the second item now?
Was the zoning?
Zoning. I'd like to bring that back too, because I'm sure we all have different opinions on it, but I think there's times when we should be advocates for zoning changes.
Right.
It's a big housing, and we're not the final say on that, but we can advocate it to selectmen and to town meetings. So I'd like to bring both those items back for further discussion on whether, what exactly we think we're going, and then what, if we take a position, what we should be doing.
I would very much like to see the advocating included into the fourth bullet on the mission statement.
Right.
Promoting community understanding and advocating for affordable housing and the housing needs of Harwich.
Yeah, agreed.
And I think Claudia's point too was advocating for the zoning changes.
Right.
Yeah, we'll support it, but we're not gonna throw dollars or effort towards it.
Right.
Right, but maybe it'll be part of it, but promoting community understanding is a separate.
We become a
Different
spokesman
than-
for it.
Yeah.
That all makes sense, and I think we can add those in between the mission statement and the goals, and then some of the actions we talk about in a minute could also support both of those ideas. All right, any other thoughts or comments before we move into this activity?
I think we're ready to move.
Okay, so let me see now if I can share my screen. It looked like I could when I was poking around in here a minute ago. Yeah, here we go. Hopefully this will work. And you should see it now, is that right?
No.
Not yet.
Not yet, okay. It's acting as if you can see it. Oh, here we go. Can't share your screen, experiencing difficulties with the video conference. Oh, shoot. Yeah, it does not seem to be working for me either. So I think what I'll do is I'll run this through verbally, but just so so you know what I'm going to be looking off to my monitor because I have this digital, basically a digital Post-it note activity here. And it has the goals that we just talked about on one side. And then it has basically a blank section for actions to address each of those goals. What kinds of things do you want to do to further those goals? Now, sometimes one action could further more than one goal, and you don't need to worry too much about that. I just want to make sure we have something that helps address every goal. Sometimes things can just kind of do double duty, which is fine. So the goals that we have here, and I did just quickly make a note about advocating for zoning changes as one of the, adding on to that goal about working with the housing committee on both informing the public, advocacy, and updating the HPP. Not that you'd spend your funds on it, but you'd spend your time, your effort, and really support them. And we did look at their mission, by the way, so thank you. I think, and I forget if it was, who had said that to me, if it was Claudia or someone else, but I thank you for that. The other goals, creating 31 units annually on the SHI, creating and preserving existing affordable units in perpetuity so you don't lose units, fostering year-round affordable housing development on your priority sites that you have control over, and then working with the committee for that education, advocacy, and HP housing production plan update. Now, I want you to know that fifth goal, I'm sorry I didn't catch this before, that fifth goal about creating criteria for the trust acquisition and development, I think, as Alana said, that can include criteria for when you want to decide to dispense of property. But I also think that that can be seen as an action item within the goal, that's goal number 3 right now, foster year-round affordable development on priority-owned sites. I think you can think of a bunch of actions for that. You can think of, well, what's our criteria for development? What's our criteria for acquisition? What's our criteria for if we want to think about selling any property that we already own? There's issuing, there's the tactical stuff, issue an RFP for the Marceline site first, and then other priority development sites that you own. Prioritizing those sites so that you know what you're going to do after you do Marceline. Engaging the community to help draft the RFP, just like we did in the forum for the last forum that we did with you guys a couple weeks ago. Just like we had an activity about the Marceline property, what is your image, or your vision? I would recommend you do that for other properties as you're thinking about writing RFPs for them, getting community input. And then establishing a developer selection process, I think, should be part of it as well. So not just criteria for the acquisition and development, but how are you going to be selecting a developer? You put the RFP out, and your development selection process will be embedded in that. But there are some choices to make around that. Are you going to have public interviews? Are you going to maybe have a series of interviews? What kind of criteria are you going to use to select the developer? What are the most important things? Maybe you include this, wanting 3 bedrooms and housing that's appropriate for families embedded into that criteria. So there's a lot of decisions. So those are just some examples, but I think that if you're looking at goal number 3, that's about foster year-round affordable housing development on priority trust-owned sites, those are some examples of actions that we would recommend for you. So I guess I'll pause there and just see, number 1, do you agree with those actions that I laid out? And then do you have any other thoughts about other actions you'd like to see in this 5-year plan that maybe address some of these other goals?
Very quiet. Mary?
If we did everything you just put on the list, I'd be pretty happy.
Well, and to that point, that's a great list of activities. The concern I have is if I point towards the Marceline property, for instance, I'm not sure we have time to go through and have a clear public dialogue in each of those activities. It may be that we need to take a first draft at our best shot at an RFP and get some reaction coming back, and then, have that discussion rather than try to, my fear is we could spend months trying to do all that and still not move ahead.
Right.
Sure. Yeah, I understand that. I know you're ready to go with getting that draft circulated. I think that's fair, and I think the fact that we covered, did get some input about the Marceline property and people's vision. You can at the forum, you can integrate that. I think what I was saying, and I feel like I'm a little bit hampered without the visual because I think it's clearer when you can see what I'm pointing to. But I think doing that again for the next property, it doesn't need to be now, but maybe in a year or two when you're ready, when you've got the Marceline, you've got a developer selected, you went through a public process to select that developer, and you're ready to look at your next property, I think that you kind of copy what you're doing for Marceline, where you have another forum about what is your vision for this, and then you create a similar public process so people can see what developers are proposing and, weigh in on that.
Yep.
Does that make more sense the way I just explained it?
Yeah, certainly we're hopeful that we always learn from each of our experiences, so we'll learn going forward. Claudia?
No, that was helpful, thank you.
Okay.
Well, what about the advocacy and the engaging the community and then updating the housing production plan? What are your thoughts about your role and how would you want to approach that? And I know that would be in collaboration with the housing committee really taking the lead on those things, but how would you envision what you would do specifically? What would you contribute?
Anyone?
I'm thinking that two things that we should be doing and have already begun to do, and that is to build partnerships with the conservation community and to build partnerships with the business community.
Partnerships with the business community, but it cut out a little when you said the first example. What was that?
Conservation community. The
Conservation. Okay, got it.
I mean, for me, the key thing in the.
And-
Sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
No, I was just going to try to solicit more feedback, so that's perfect, Brendan. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, just in the production plan, I mean, to me, I think it sits with the planning department to develop. It's a pretty big document that's now pretty much dated, and the last one was 2016. But, the affordability portion, obviously, we can help out on that and what the housing needs are and get some kind of target goal on what we can create. But yeah, to me, I always thought it sat with the planning department to create. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, my understanding is,
plan.
I would hope that, as we talked about briefly about the local comprehensive plan and the housing production plan, that they've hired outside help to do it. I would presume, if not, I'll follow up, that we're part of that process. Maybe they appear in front of us here and they, either after they've drafted or while they're drafting it, ask for our input and our discussion, so we're part of that. I agree with Brendan, that's elsewhere right now. I want to be listened to, rurally as a group, but I think it's not our lead. Mary?
I agree, and I'm thinking giving them this report that Jen's just put together
help.
could be input to that plan.
Right. Yeah, great, yes.
That makes a lot of sense. And often, when we do those housing production plans, and I think other consultants do as well, we'll go through an interview process or doing focus groups, but some way to really get input from folks like you as the members of the Board of Trustees, as well as the Housing Committee and any other partners, in housing in the region even. So that makes sense in terms of your role.
And just to reinforce or jump on what Bob said, we had Michael Locke as part of the conservation community, if you will. Cindy Williams couldn't make it today, but I'm sure there are other folks we need to bring in as well. And the broader our discussion is, the better we'll be.
Yeah, that sounds great. Now, if you could talk a little bit about what you envision for your role in terms of advocacy. So some trusts we've worked with have, taken specific positions that they would discuss as a trust and vote on, and then sort of go around to the various public meetings and whatnot, and say the housing trust supports this zoning change, whatever it may be. And that could be one role. Another role that I've seen trust members take is basically saying we authorize our board members, if they have opinions about housing, that you don't have to necessarily check in with the whole board, but you can just represent that you're a member of the board and you feel X, Y, and Z. But having some protocol in place ahead of time is probably worthwhile in terms of what you decide to advocate for and what you don't want to advocate for.
I think that's a great idea, Jen, because it's one thing to speak as an individual, and it's another thing to speak as a representative of a group.
I think it takes one of us to bring an idea to the table, just like Bob bringing Michael in last week.
Yeah.
Off my radar.
Yep.
But Michael was here. Makes a lot of sense to have us,
Right.
engage and bring people here or go to their committees.
Yeah.
And present what we're up to, or
Yeah.
just engage. So that was a pretty key, I think.
And then
Good.
probably speaking to Larry's point about the structure, like
Right.
making sure it's all funneling, so we're not, I know I've
Right.
seen that in town where people are very clear about whether they're speaking as an individual or a member of a group or as a group, so I think that was very valid.
And I would suggest to you that if we bring something to the committee and we vote on it, and then each of you can go out and make that statement in behalf of the committee.
Right.
So we can have it both ways.
No, that's a good way to do it.
Okay, yeah.
And that way we have some agreement as a committee as a whole that, this is our position, and then go for it,
Okay.
That's a great idea.
And now let me steer you to think about in the informing the public piece. And so you can do that in all different ways. You could piggyback onto the housing production plan process, like I was mentioning earlier, about engagement, doing, the consultant would get it together, but that would be helping to inform the community as well as seeking feedback from them. But were you thinking anything else? So I'll give you some examples. Some communities, and this would obviously be with I think, obviously, the Housing Committee taking the lead and you in a support role, but some communities do, regular forums, like maybe once a year where they bring the community, or maybe they just bring all the different boards and committees together that have anything to do with housing or land development, and they talk through housing needs and issues and try to collaborate. So they have some kind of sometimes they call that a housing roundtable. I know the town of Concord, Massachusetts does that. It's, I think they bring together something like, 7 or 8 committees every year. And they go through what everybody's working on and try to stay informed, and it's very collaborative. Another way is doing more public forums where you could host speakers or, guest speakers from the region or other experts that come in, or it could be something that, you're really looking not so much to portray information, but to get information. You could do some communities have, and forgive me if you already have this, I just can't remember. Some communities have a section on their website that's all about housing and, what are our housing needs? How can you get help if you need housing? So it goes both ways. It's trying to educate, inform about needs, but also connect people to resources. So there's all sorts of ways of doing this, informing the public piece. And I just wonder, I just threw out a bunch of ideas to get you thinking, but I wonder if any of those resonate or if you have any other ideas.
So on our agenda today, we have we're going to be discussing setting up a joint meeting with the Housing Committee. And the Housing Committee, I believe, has struggled to get a quorum lately, and I think they might have it or not. But it would be nice to get them in here, but have a plan before we get them in here, I think. That would be important, because they might be down a couple of members, and I sat in a couple of their meetings early on in the year, and they were shooting big picture over 80% AMI stuff that, we can hopefully participate in the future or vice versa. So, and then we also, on our end, I think that we would want them to help us with the 80% or less. So it'd be nice to come up with a plan, or get them in here and then create a plan. And then also, I know they get their directive from the Board of Selectmen as well, so, as an advisory committee to them. So before we get them in here, we should have an idea of, what the ask is, both ways.
Mary?
Certainly the website's a good idea. I don't know, do we already have something like that, Brianna, or?
I have resources and information on my page, but I'm not sure that you guys have it on yours or not.
Okay.
Yeah. But I could work with Bob to help if you wanted to add that to your page,
Okay.
if that's the clerk's responsibility.
You mean add one housing webpage, or?
We could conjoin them, or something we could discuss.
Yeah, because the committee, our trust, and the Housing Authority all have their own little webpage within the town website.
I know that Wellfleet has housing, like a housing partnership where it's all the different committees come together and post something on one site.
Oh, okay.
That would be helpful to the community, I would
Yeah.
think, to have it all in one place.
Absolutely.
And that's Wellfleet, so we look at their site, that would give us the example of that.
Or, sorry, it's Wellfleet Housing, and it's their partnership, their trust, and one of their committees that,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of bringing as many groups as we can together and some discussion as well. I wonder if an easy way of doing that would be go back to our housing production plan, because they're pulling those groups together, and maybe encourage them to have one, at least one forum just on housing that we're invited to and all the groups are invited to. Take advantage of them while they're operational.
Larry, I'd be surprised if that isn't part of their process.
I'm sure it is, but we
Yeah.
just have to know about it.
Yeah,
Yeah. If not, it should be. We expect
right,
it is.
right.
All right, good. I like this. Now I can't see everyone that wanted to add a point on that before I move on.
I think, Jen, that we would be smart to really find the most excellent websites available to take lessons from, because it's one thing to have information going out, but it's another thing to create action. And I would love to see examples of those most effective websites that speak to the issue of housing and give people a voice to speak to the issue of housing. So that would be helpful research information for me to have.
Great. All right, that sounds great. All right, good. So the last thing I really wanted to ask you about was when you were considering requests from developers who may want, and I know that, we've already talked with Brianne about helping you with an application process, but my question is more broad than that. So when you have developers come in and ask you or tell you you're going to get a request somewhere down the line, like you heard recently, what, just in general, what are you thinking there? Are you feeling like, it sounds to me like you do want to entertain those requests in addition to looking at things that you're doing on your own land, but just talk to me more about what you have in mind with funding private developers or nonprofit developers or what have you.
Well, I guess an example, we had the Pine
Pine Oaks.
Pine Oaks 4, ask if there's a possibility that we might help fund them. And so we had, our ask on that was, is there a procedure that if we could consider requests like that, that would clearly help our housing inventory, affordable housing inventory? And so that's where I think that question came from. And I don't know what exactly our limitations are, but I do think if we have funds that are going for affordable housing, I'd like to have that open up. If a request comes to us and we approve it, is there a way to expend those
Yeah.
funds?
I think one of the problems we've had a couple of developers come in front of us, but there's never really an official ask. And I don't think they're at that stage yet. Like, they haven't created their pro forma to see where all the funding sources are gonna come from. I've seen some of those where they'll pinpoint exactly where all their funding is coming from. And pretty much, a breakdown of what a budget would look like and how they're gonna get there. So I think a lot of the developers that are coming in front of us, they're not at that stage yet. So they're not in a position to ask, nor are we able to even offer anything because we don't know exactly what they're gonna be doing.
Right.
So I think that's where it is,
Right.
like a catch-22.
But we have a process in place that answers those. I think that's all we're looking for now. Bob?
Right.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
I think that.
May I? Yep, go ahead, Bob.
I think that we were also looking at the question that Paul raised a couple of weeks back about when does an application become a real application? And once it's really been submitted and stamped, received, et cetera, that puts it in a whole different light. Or maybe it was Joe that was talking about that, I'm not sure, but.
Well, I think the ask for money will come after we launch an RFP and the developer comes back. So in that process,
Yeah,
that's where the ask is gonna come.
Yeah, this wasn't
For
for
fun, yeah.
an RFP response, but this was from another developer response.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And can I ask how, and this Community Preservation Committee may have a whole different take on this, but I'm curious, what is your view on how the CPA funds should be involved with a developer coming in to ask? Like, let's just take Pine Oaks as an example. Right now, I think they could come to both you and they could also submit an application to the Community Preservation Committee for additional funds. Some communities funnel all of their housing considerations into the trust so that the developer then just goes to the trust and the trust has all the CPA housing funds already, that it might be more than the 10% minimum even. And the developer goes to one place and doesn't need to then go through town meeting if the money's already in the trust fund. So I'm just throwing that out so that you start to think about that a little. But if you have a first reaction on that, what you would like that process to be, that would be helpful to know.
Go ahead, Bob.
I think in line with what Larry started the meeting with in terms of creating the funnel and getting the funnel to go to one place and then disperse from there in terms of information, I would really rather have it work that way, that the money come from whatever source to the Affordable Trust and then be dispersed out.
It sounds like it's more efficient or more streamlined from what I'm understanding as well, so that seems to be a benefit.
Yeah. And
Yeah, it absolutely is. And the developer, you can actually allocate those funds a lot more efficiently than if you needed to wait for a town meeting.
Okay.
And it would also respond to some concerns that we've had expressed in the past regarding this committee of not enough communication with CPC, that we had these discussions up front, so it would help answer that as well.
That would be a change for CPC, though, so we'd have to have a conversation
Very
with
much
them.
conversation, and maybe it's more informal information going back and forth.
Right, right.
you want,
'Cause
may never get to a formal process, but I agree.
Because right now, they do fund,
By
in
themselves.
addition to the trust, they fund, some money goes to partnership, and I think they would entertain Pine Oaks, so we
It
need,
almost seems like we should really partner with Pine Oaks, in a way.
yeah.
I mean, we could be a direct funding source, it's easier, like Jen said. Just seems like that would be a good way to partner with them.
Yeah.
Can I ask Joe a question?
Well, you can't, as far as I'm concerned, go for it.
Bonding, can you explain that process to us, if we had the ability to do so?
So in a word, no.
Okay.
I could not explain bonding in general terms. I think what your question may be getting to is if it's a follow-up to the Community Preservation Committee has talked about borrowings. Is that what you're getting at?
Correct.
So I apologize in advance. I'm going to try and use general language for the benefit not just of you folks, but anyone that may watch this meeting in the future. When Brendan asks about bonding, that is borrowing for the town by seeking municipal bonds. The Community Preservation Committee, as I understand it, has, or any Community Preservation Committee has the ability through the Community Preservation Act to also borrow or acquire debt. It has been a topic of discussion that the chair of that committee, David Nixon, has wanted to have with any number of appropriate individuals, but we've never ventured into that specifically for Harwich yet. So again, my understanding generally is that the Community Preservation Act allows for a borrowing mechanism through CPC or Community Preservation Committee. And of course, the town has the right to borrow. So I hope that answers the question in general. It's a small word with a big topic behind it.
Yeah, I got you. So better to go through CPA. I got you.
Jen, the floor is yours again.
All right, good. Well, I think Elena and I probably have enough information to go on to get your draft plan to the next stage, which will be giving you the first full draft of, well, it won't be completely full, and I'll explain that in a minute, but giving you a mostly complete draft that will include the goals and the mission that we've talked about as revised from this conversation. And then it will go through what actions over the next 5 years could you take specifically. They're going to be, tactile actions that you can take to further those goals. And then at our next meeting, what I want to do, and I'll look to see when that is, it's probably in August sometime. What I'll look to do is get your feedback on that draft. We can give that to you for your packet the week before. And then what we're going to do is leave the two pieces that won't be complete, because we'll want to discuss it with you first, will be a year one action plan, because we want to make sure we've got the actions right before we set out your year one action plan. And we do it by month. So if you approve this, let's say you approve this in October, we'll start your year one action plan in November. And so November, we want you to do this. December, we want you to do that. So that will be after this initial draft. We'll talk with you about that, go through the actions in the draft, and then we'll create that year one action plan for your September meeting. In addition, we'll create a year one, or actually we'll do a 5-year budget for you that makes some assumptions about CPA money and other funding sources as well that we'll want to talk with you about at the next meeting. And then in September, we'll include that budget along with the year one action plan in the next draft. And then October will be a presentation of the draft, which we'll need to talk about who you want us to, I hope I'm getting that right. I'm doing that all from memory, Elena. So if you don't mind pulling up the schedule and just correct me if I mistook that timeline, but I think that that's our timeline. And we have a presentation that we can do. You can decide who that presentation's with. Maybe you'll want to invite the Housing Committee and the CPC and the Select Board, or maybe you'll want us to do the presentation at the Select Board. and invite those committees. It's up to you. It's been done all different ways. You may want that to be an evening presentation rather than a daytime, but something to think about. You don't need to decide right now, but those are really the next steps. So I just want to make sure that all sounded good. And Elena, did you pull that schedule up? She's working on it. So yeah. So if that's not right, because I don't trust my memory, I should have pulled it up before I spoke. But I believe those are our 3 next steps. Basically, is give you that draft based on what we talked about today. Then we'll add in the action plan and budget at the September meeting, and then we'll do that presentation in October.
Just informative. Our next meeting is August 14th.
Oh, thank you. Perfect. Good.
But before we let you go, Jen, certainly
Yeah.
at the top of our mind, in addition of all this, is how do we get started and complete the Marceline RFP? What's in your mind?
Yeah. So where are you now? I think, did Paul and Brianna already create a draft RFP? I can't remember where you're.
I'm not sure where you are on that.
Last I saw at your last meeting is you wanted to create an RFP to hire a consultant to create the RFP for the property with you. Is that correct?
Okay, if that's our next step, is to hire consultants to do our RFP. So Joe, let me bring you up. Can we ask Jen, do we need something more on that? We approved that at our last meeting, actually.
Right.
Yes.
To move ahead.
Wasn't it an RFQ or something?
And I don't think anything's happened on that. Do we need to have funds for, how do we get this started?
Well, to the last point first, I believe what you voted, let me check your minutes. I believe you voted the use of the funds, so that frees up the town to do the procurement.
Okay,
As I understood it from your last meeting, there were 2 distinct discussions. The first was, as you've talked about with Jen, amending her action plan contract, which I think is the last item on your agenda today,
right.
to do the application process.
The application process.
For developers.
Right. But I thought we'd also approved utilizing funds to hire help to work on the RFP.
Yeah, originally Brianna and Paul were gonna tackle it.
And they've still probably done some footwork on that. But I think our discussion there was we need additional funds to get moving, help.
So, when you say we, are you talking the trust needs additional funds or additional resources?
I think we have funds that we can expend, the trust to go
I
ahead
would
with
agree with that
this.
assertion, yep.
And that we should go ahead and get help on the RFP.
So I think then the only concern would be if you're looking to leverage the existing contract that the town has through the trust with J.M. Gouldson, you're exceeding the change order abilities under the procurement laws.
So we'd have to,
So what's our next,
Separate
right, you
request
mentioned
for
that
proposal.
before, so what's our action then to move ahead?
I'll work with staff to develop an RFP for that service.
And what's the timing of that?
Generally speaking, it can be anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks, depending upon availability of staff and other. I could strive for something coming back to you folks for your meeting on the 14th.
Okay, because I was going to say if we could do it quicker, I'd ask for a special meeting, because I'm anxious to get this started.
I can add it to the queue. It's simply the matter of tracking all of the activities for all of the departments.
Okay, will you get back to me, because if it's an earlier date, I would, no one objects, I would ask for a special meeting, because we're getting bogged down again and getting this going, and I'm anxious to get, as you know, I'm anxious to get moving.
I appreciate that. I can commit today to your meeting on the 14th of August.
Okay.
Anything before that, I can't commit to
I
until
understand that.
I go over all the staff
And we get
allocation.
lucky, let me know.
Say again?
If we get lucky, let me know.
Okay.
can I ask one question?
Yep.
If you handle the procurement for us, would it be a mistake for us to try to do it ourselves? On a scale of 1 to 10, how bad of an idea is that?
I'd like to answer the question in a different manner.
Smart thinking.
The trust, as it relates to municipal corporations, is a part of the town. The town's charter only identifies one role for procurement, and that's through the town administrator. So I don't think that it's legally feasible for the trust to do its own procurement per se. I don't think that's how the apparatus is set up, if you will. However, we being administration, and I, rely upon public bodies such as yours to help shape the procurement itself. So what we're talking about, if I've heard it correctly, is an RFP for assistance in creating a development RFP for land, correct?
Correct.
Meaning not the development itself, but
to generate the RFP.
the step before that. So I think, and I'm going to use an indulgence that I heard Jen, and I don't know if Jen sees my back on the screen. If she does, I apologize. I'm only going from memory as well. What we're generally talking about are procurements under Chapter 30B, which are very straightforward. I believe that RFP that we just talked about, where a consultant can advise the trust and the town on building a development of RFP, is merely a supplier service. That's to say the Chapter 30B, which is what 90% of the work that we do on. If it falls under the construction provisions, it's a completely different animal. And so I'd need to evaluate that in the short term. I believe it's safe to think that it's simply a service under 30B. But if it isn't, that's a big change. That's a big difference.
Mary?
I don't know if I imagined this or what, but I thought the last time we talked about this, because I remember the bit that we couldn't use Jen under the existing contract because it went beyond the scope. But I thought there was something besides an RFP, an RFQ that was easier to do, that then we just needed we only needed one person to bid, and if that person bid, we were good? Am I making this up?
Not, Mr. Chair, through you, if I could. Not at all. You are correct. If we believe the value of the resultant contract with that vendor, consultant, service provider is to be 50,000, or excuse me, is to be less than 50,000, but more than 10,000, then we, the town, would solicit for 3 quotes and only need 1 to come back in. The problem lies, however, if we discover that it's greater than 50,000, then it's not as simple as that process.
Oh.
So the quick primer on 30B would be less than 10,000 sound business practices, which gives us the greatest latitude. Between 10,000 and 50,000 is request for quotes, which is what you've just described.
Okay.
Beyond that, beyond 50,000, it becomes either a request for proposals, which is common, or invitation for bid, which is less common. RFP gives us more control over who we pick. Invitation for bids are IFB. It's just high bid and we're done, or low bid depending upon what we're looking for. But it's the element of developing land and construction that's the outlier for me
Okay.
in the short term.
One follow-up, and we believe this is probably going to at least approach 50? Is that why you think we need an RFP?
Well, yes, 50,000 doesn't get you much in any day, certainly not these days. And I simply don't know right now, talking to you in real time, what the marketplace is calling for. I'd be more than happy to yield this microphone, and you might want to ask your consultant, who is much more in tune with the marketplace, if she has any thoughts on that. Sorry, Jen, but I just tagged out.
Did you hear that, Jen?
I heard a little bit. I'm sorry. I started to zone out because I got distracted by an email, to be honest. But
we're
I think what
talking-
you were asking is what the level of service would be, if it would be okay to do an RFQ?
Or what your best guesstimate of what cost might be to generate an RFP?
Yeah, so it would be under 50,000 for sure. I could say that. I'd have to price it out and look at, number of meetings and whatnot, but If I had to just guess right now, don't hold me to this, but if I had to guess right now, we could probably do it for less than 20,000, especially if we're not looking at, more public meetings and things like that.
Joe?
Can I just do a timeout? Sorry. Jen, for our purposes, the question is, what does the marketplace see for that sort of consultancy? And I think you've answered that in less than 50. I would encourage you to not talk specifically to any future quote, just because that can be
Yes.
problematic from a procurement. But, Mr. Chairman, I think what we heard from a qualified vendor in the marketplace is that we're looking at less than 50, so it's request for quotes. So that does change.
So that does change to make
turnaround
it
time.
easier and
Correct.
get it going.
Yeah.
So we might be able to move even quicker on it then.
Correct.
Okay, great.
So tomorrow.
Tomorrow we'll have it.
Well,
Tomorrow I will meet with staff to insert the RFQ as part of our procurement
I think
process.
my message is clear, looking around, is that if we need to take an action before the 14th to start the process, let me know and we'll call a special meeting.
If I may respond?
Yes.
So I think today, July 10th, if we understand that the value of that service is less than 50,000, and you've already authorized the use of funds, those answer the two questions that I always need as the chief procurement officer to go forward.
Okay.
The only other item that we might need some direction on, I don't think so, but it's up to you folks, is if you want to have a hand in describing the services that we're looking for. So our procurement process is, whether it's a staff member or a public body, we look to the end user of the contract to describe for administration the services being sought. I'd be more than happy to work with our housing advocate. I think the two of us have heard quite a bit of information from you folks, and we can take a crack at that. If, however, the public body wants to be a part of that, you'd need to do that at a public meeting.
Yeah. Claudia's saying I should be,
I think it would be, my would be Joe, Brianna, and Larry as a, can it be the three of you that are taking a stab at it?
There's no objection there. If
Okay.
it's
This is
the,
just the request for quotation.
Yeah.
special
Right,
quotation.
right.
I
if
think it
it's the
should be,
sense, if it's the sense of
straightforward.
the trustees that be given to your chair, I think that's an appropriate.
We love our chair, yes.
Welcome
Okay,
aboard,
great.
Larry.
Welcome back, right? Well, thank you, Joe. Bob?
Larry, in the minutes from our last meeting, it reads, Mr. Ballantyne moved to contract J.M. Goldson to write a draft RFP for the Marceline property and an authorization to use funds. That was seconded by Mary, and the vote was 5-0.
I think that was the whole RFQ discussion.
RFQ discussion, yeah, I think this corrects that minutes.
Yeah.
And we can't
And we can't do that.
say it's gonna be Jen. We have to do the RFQ
It's
and
over.
see who we
So-
get.
And
So,
so,
I
Bob,
think-
we need to correct the minutes.
I think
Yeah,
we need
yeah.
to delete that from
Yeah.
the.
I agree, I agree.
Okay.
I agree. Nice
Good,
pickup,
good
Bob.
call,
Thank you.
Bob.
On that
You're gonna be
topic,
our go-to person, Bob, on minutes if you're not
Clerk
careful.
has to do
tag, you're
something.
in. What I took from that, whatever the minutes reflected,
Right.
is the use of the funds. That was the most important part of that
important, yeah.
discussion,
Okay.
for our purposes. Because then we can demonstrate to the accounting department that the town can rely upon your funding source.
Okay.
So we should leave it?
No,
No,
I think we should take it out. Well,
no, you leave it.
leave the part in
Given
the
that you're gonna
funding.
change your
Leave
minutes
the-
anyway, you would
Yeah,
want to
clean-
reflect the
let's
accuracy.
clean it up.
Yeah.
Okay,
We'll clean it up, leave the funding part in there, we'll clean up the other part.
we're good.
Jen, are we, I think we've beat this subject up then?
It sounds good to me, and yeah, we would be happy to respond to that kind of an RFQ when it's released.
Thank
Okay.
you very much.
One final comment as you move forward, not immediately, but I'd be interested in your, we had one public forum that maybe participation wasn't quite as great, but overall it was a good forum. I'd be interested in your thoughts. What should be our next forum? You suggested some of those of groups coming together, but maybe broaden that discussion of what we should be doing going forward.
Are you talking about just in general, or are you talking about more specifically about the Marceline property?
Just in general.
In general, yeah. Well, I guess I'm inclined to have you think about, piggybacking on the housing production plan, especially if they're going to have a public forum anyway. And then once that's done, maybe in future years, you work with the housing committee to sponsor a forum each year where you're, getting public input, but also sharing something. Maybe you even bring in some kind of guest speaker. It could be something from, a regional organization or someone else, but something to make it, or sharing new data, anything new that's been coming out, something that makes it a little different each year so that you can get some good kind of momentum going on talking about these. So that's one thing to think about. I don't know how that resonates with you all.
Sounds good. Thank you, Jen. Thank you all. Thank you, Jen and Elena. And we'll move on.
Thank you very much.
Next
right,
item is
thank
the, Bob, I brought you for the role of the trust clerk.
The trust clerk.
Well, you're doing it.
You're doing a great,
doing it.
you're doing a great job. I think we won't touch that.
Yeah,
Just keep on doing what you're doing.
I just stumbled into something. No, I wanted to start that conversation by apologizing to Brianna for returning to her thinking that she was working for us.
Yeah.
So that, I want to just, on the record, for everybody to hear, I'm sorry.
You already apologized, but
well,
thank you. Yeah,
It's more public.
thank you.
So I'm happy to just continue to make things up as I go, but that doesn't seem right.
Yeah.
Is there any history of the clerk having a set of roles and responsibilities?
Not, Brandon, you,
Not really.
not really, I
Yeah.
think. I have no, I hate to do this to you, Bob, but I would probably throw that back at you and say, you want to, write some, try to define that a little bit, that we can bring it back here and discuss it
Well,
and how we move forward.
one of the things that makes sense to me is that we have somebody who's going to be in a position to watch the website and to make sure that the information on the website is good information,
Right.
not old information. And I would think that would be one task
Yeah.
for the clerk. And
Right.
so I don't need to be the one to go in and change information, but I'll need to
check
work with the town to figure out how best to do that.
Okay.
That sounds great.
Is that,
But
that good
that's
for a
great,
first
and
step?
why it is, but give us some other dot points on that, and we'll try to define something, that at least put some rails around it, so
Okay,
you feel more comfort,
okay.
okay?
Yep.
Thank you again, Bob, for that.
Larry, on that same topic, and sorry I ducked out for a second, did you also take on posting? Who's posting our meetings?
Brianna is,
Oh, you're posting our
but
meetings.
that may be the
okay.
town, that may be the clerk's responsibility, actually.
Well, I don't know how
Doesn't
it
matter to
works
me.
with
I
other
would
committees.
keep that with Brown, I think.
Yeah,
Okay, Joe?
Yeah.
Recognizing that I was encouraged by one of my supervisors to not say things like respectfully. My ask on behalf of staff would be, the charter requires every public body to organize or reorganize at the first meeting after July 1st. I would argue that you folks are a different case whereby you had full membership and you did that soon thereafter, you could affirm that. But aside from that action, the charter requires that there be a chair, a vice chair. Did I do that right? Or a
Yeah.
chair and a vice chair. I'm not sure who's vice chair.
I'm not a vice chair.
All right, so chair,
Then
vice
there's
chair,
vice
and clerk. It doesn't speak any more to those roles, so we then look at general parliamentary practices. We understand the chair to be the presiding officer of the public body. We understand the vice chair to be ready to serve in that capacity should the chair be absent. And we recognize that the clerk, the secretary, whatever the role is called, is that individual responsible for the records of the public body. So it would be an appropriate task, in my opinion, that the clerk of the public body oversee the posting of the meetings. The chair establishes the agenda, however the chair does that, either in consultation with staff, with trust members, or anyone else, develops the topics. The clerk then works with the town clerk's office to post it correctly. you folks have, where most public bodies don't, you have access to a recording secretary. That is not a role of trustees, that's a staff role. So the clerk could coordinate any changes like you're doing today with the recording secretary to update the minutes, but the clerk would then present the minutes to the public body. So those are some of the roles that I would suggest you would see a clerk of a public body doing.
Okay.
But to the fine point, it would not be appropriate for staff to be responsible for your organizational tasks, such as posting meetings and minutes and all of that. There are different staff touch points where we can assist, we the town, can assist on websites and documentation. But I would be in opposition to the suggestion by Vice Chair. Did I say that politely enough or couched enough? All right. I hope that clarifies. I hope that helps.
And that, Larry, and that's in keeping, I'm guessing, with other committees?
Correct.
Their clerk posts, they don't have someone on staff that posts?
Correct. Some committees, it's either the clerk or the chair or someone
Okay.
designated by the public body.
But that body does its own posting?
That's my understanding, correct. Yep.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Sorry, Bob.
Hoping you're still happy about this.
Nothing to be sorry about, Jeff.
So,
Okay, good.
so
Good.
Bob's gonna post the meeting going
Right.
forward, okay. All right, I just wanna make sure.
And, Bob, I'm sure, staff will help you if you need help on learning how to post a meeting. It's pretty straightforward, but, you know, you have to get on the website and do that.
Mr. Chair, if I may through you, yes, I was remiss. I have a meeting tomorrow with the town clerk, some of her staff members, some of my staff members. We are partnering on educational opportunities and how-to guides and all of that for public bodies so that the appropriate folks are aware of their responsibilities and the support you can get from the town to do those.
Okay.
So we're actively
Okay.
working on that.
Good,
Great.
good. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Next one is discussion and setting a joint meeting with the Housing Committee. I think that's a short discussion. I'll ask Liz to join us in the Housing Committee. But I think to Brenda's point, get back to me on specific items that we should be discussing with the Housing Committee. Because Bob, yours is well taken. We should have some agenda items for that we want to discuss. And we'll be sure we include that.
Yeah. It occurred to me in the conversation with Jen just minutes ago that there could be an annual housing forum underwritten by the
I
three
agree.
of us.
Yeah.
The Housing Authority, the Housing Committee, and the Affordable Housing
Yeah.
Trust.
Absolutely.
I think somewhere it's written that we are
Yeah, once a year
required to have a
required.
joint meeting?
Right.
And they take that to the Board of Selectmen
Yeah.
as an update, correct.
My
We
only,
do
my
that
only
once a year.
comment on that is that I would be in favor of doing it more often than that, just so we
Yeah,
have
yeah.
communication. Whether it's quarterly or semi-annually, but it's not a big deal to get us all in one room for one meeting
Yeah.
Right,
and have an open discussion. We don't
Right.
need a lot.
Mhm.
We need some dot points, but not a lot. We need just discussion. They need to all think we're all the same group.
Yeah, the Cape Cod Commission did a couple of forums where they had all the towns come, but we could do it just all of, Harwich,
Right,
maybe even the planning department, I don't know.
yep.
Yeah, so,
yeah.
It
Good.
sounded like Jen was gonna, I know I sent her the missions, or the draft.
Right, she was gonna,
From the committee and copied Liz. I should have copied you.
Okay.
I'm not sure who to copy
Okay.
emails, but, so I don't know if she has something that she could provide that would be a draft of what she's thinking
okay.
based on what we heard.
Yeah, send that to me as well, and I'll try to follow up as well.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, good. Bob, other thoughts on that? Because you're one that's,
Not yet.
is that a threat? Well, but I think the bottom line is that we have to, as much as possible, blur the lines between the committees and all work together. We all have the same goal. maybe different factions of it, but we need to really have more discussion. Last item on the agenda is, Brianna, I'm going to turn this over to you. It's the application form, because you've been working on it, I think, and this came up earlier.
Did you skip F, E?
Oh, I skipped E. Owned by, Brendan, you want to give us an update on the properties owned by the trust? I'm not sure anything much happened
I mean,
since the
not much
last
has
time.
really changed. You know, to me, Oak Street is one that's teetering back and forth. Last time I spoke with Paul, who's no longer with us, but he was trying to find out if the land had to be continuous around the vernal pool to make it viable for a piece of, for anything to be built there. It would still have to go in front of conservation and health. I mean, that's a property, and, I mean, just all the properties we have, you know, it'd be nice to try to figure out what we can and can't
yeah.
do, but now we don't have a town planner to kind of help us with
Right.
that, but, you know, just, there's a little bit of work with all of those properties that are
Yeah.
tough to do something with.
Mary, didn't you speak about Sisson as being your number 2 priority? Marceline 1?
Yeah, I would love to get something, I had made notes on 2 things for there. I would love to have maybe make that an agenda item for another meeting, to talk about Sisson, what our options are, and maybe even bring, Brendan suggested this,
Yeah,
bring in somebody from
bring in the
Harwich
director.
Junior Theater, whatever their new name
I
is,
think that's a great idea.
to
That-
just
yeah.
explore, because we've got a building, we've got land. I don't know, that one looks like an easy,
Well, it's easy, but we've talked about it for probably 15, 18 years, I forget.
yeah, so it's not that easy, I guess,
Yeah.
huh?
Yeah, and I thought I heard that, I think it'll be great to bring in the director, because I
Yeah.
just through the grapevine, I was hearing that they were trying to expand and
Right.
have classes and really build that up on that property, so.
I'll follow up with that.
And maybe this other person that should be in on that discussion is our cultural affairs director, Kara, because there's some thought that could these that take place there take place at the 204. But we shouldn't have that conversation without Kara.
Yeah, both of them, would be nice to have them here.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other one I have, I think I sent this to you, Larry. Jeff Lokentour
Yeah.
sent a
you did.
letter inquiring about the property on Oak Street.
Right.
He would like to pursue that, to build a community building. I guess it's been proven that you can't have more than like one bedroom there due to the,
Yeah.
Well, we don't
Metal.
know yet, yeah.
Yeah, I did get that email, and I know Brendan and I talked. This came up, Mary, I believe, last year's when he presented this to selectmen.
well, then he was proposing a housing.
Arbor House, I think at the time.
Now he's proposing
But
using that Oak
I-
Street thing.
So
I'm open to that, but I think at a later date, I think he needs to scope out what he has available for funding, a lot of items
Okay.
first.
yeah.
So let's hold, I'd like to put that on hold now
Okay,
and let him develop his thought process a little more.
In either way, he would have to wait, just like any other developer, for us to do an RFP,
yeah.
and that's when he would come to the table.
Yeah.
So I
What
think,
what should I tell him? I feel some obligation to get back to him.
I guess tell him that when he has his thoughts more developed, has
Okay.
a clearer idea of the funding, he'll have to come through the normal process and request,
Request to be on the agenda?
well, an RFP and stuff, but I think he's far from that right now.
he's been in front of us a couple of times.
Right,
But
I've
I
seen
think
him,
it's
yeah.
best if,
His motivations are great, so I
Yeah,
don't want to throw it away, but I don't
Mhm.
want to move ahead with no hope of doing anything either.
Okay, thanks.
But I'll follow up certainly on the Sisson Road.
Okay, great.
Bob?
This is not an agenda item, but I'm could probably find a way to include it as one. But Bob Wilbur is here coming to do a presentation here at the community center as a follow-up to Mike Locke's visit.
Right.
And that's on September 27th at 2 o'clock. And I've offered to work with Mike Locke about a planning committee and to think about who we should be inviting to
Right.
that. So I would ask each of you to send me a message or send a message to Larry that can then be sent to me
Okay,
about who you would want to see included in that. I'm thinking that if we invite all of the affordable housing trusts for all of the towns on the Cape, that would be a good conversation.
yeah.
And
would be.
also all of the land conservation groups that are on the Cape.
Yes.
So,
And he,
So-
remind me, he's from Concord or somewhere that has done housing in conjunction with conservation?
they've done some significant work in Stowe, Massachusetts.
Stowe, okay,
And he's an officer of the state,
yeah,
so.
okay.
Well, that's great, because we wanted to hear from him based on your comment and
Absolutely.
Michael Locke's comment, Mike Locke, so, yeah. Okay, so that would be the, we'll worry about Sisson Street in addition to the Marceline property.
Great.
I'm pausing so I don't jump ahead, but I think I'm safe to go to Brianna, you now?
Safe now, yep. So I'll give my update. So I spoke with Jen at JM Goldstein about expanding your contract to include the application form and process for developers. So she just gave me some information that I wanted to pass along to you all. So the additional cost would be $5,500 for that service. And it would take roughly 6 to 8 weeks to complete. And it includes 2 rounds of virtual meetings. The first is to discuss the approach and to get a clear idea on the trust's objectives. And the second meeting will be to review the draft that they put together, and then to get feedback and clarity and answer any further questions you may have. And then she will, or JM Goldstein will revise and finalize the application form and process. And I believe that's something you don't have to do an RFQ for, and you can just get
Right.
that service.
And, Joe, you're
Here
gonna
comes
comment?
Joe.
Uh-oh,
No, just an addendum, excuse me. So based on that information, what I will do now is look at the current agreement that the town has with J.M. Goldson to see if it falls within the parameters allowed by Chapter 30B.
Okay.
The number, although seemingly small, is really just predicated on whether there's a 10% bump or a 20% bump. And so I'll be able to do that with Brianna, and we'll be able to report back by email to the chair on that next step.
Okay.
But that's very useful
Great.
information for our next steps.
And that's great, because
That's
that
fabulous.
circles around to the comments we had earlier about we have a process in place
Yeah.
to help fund another project. So that, thank you, Brenda, that's great. And we'll move ahead. Anything else we need to discuss today?
Can I add something real quick?
Yeah,
Thoughts in getting in front of the CPC, just to give an update of what we've been up to?
Yeah, this-
Is that possible for
it
me
is.
to do, or do it together?
Let's do it together.
Yep.
I talked to Dave Nixon a couple days ago, and I'll finalize that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then secondly, there's been discussion about 100% AMI that was at the forum. And Art Bowden reached out to me over the weekend. That was a surprise to him. Mr. Waystack. I've always known it to be 100% for CPC, with the CPA funds. And I did some research last night, really dove into it, and I found the language that supports that. But then coming back to us, we're still at 80% or less. But it'd be nice to get together with CPC and talk about that, because at their last meeting, that was a topic. And Mr. Doan wasn't able to speak to it because he was recusing himself because Mr. Winstead was presenting Pine Oaks 4. So, and he has a really good handle on it, so I think it'd be kind of nice to talk about it there and then bring it all back here in one nice
That would be.
neat package.
Right, okay, good. Joe?
sounds good.
Just before you adjourn, and again, this is technically under public comment, meaning it's not for any discussion or deliberation by the trust. Wanted to inform you that now that the trust is newly constituted, the town will work with the trustees to update your documents that are on record with the Barnstable County Registry of Deeds to reflect that you 5 members are the trustees, that Mr. Ballantyne is the chair, so that's a required act. I would just like to put out there, and again, it would be through the chair, so if you had any thoughts, you could get to the chair. You may want to consider at your August 14th meeting to just reaffirm your reorganization. I wouldn't want anyone to suggest that you're not in concert or in agreement with the charter. And so I wouldn't suggest that you need to do a whole rigmarole, that's a fancy word, but there might be value in just affirming the organization of the trust.
Okay.
And then we could rely upon that action with, through council to get those, that information, that instrument recorded with the registry.
Okay.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Cal. Any other, Mary, anything else? Claudia? Brendan?
All set.
Bob?
All set.
Brianna? All set? Accept the motion to adjourn?
2:35.
Write that down. I don't want our clerk to go after us here. All in favor?
Aye.